another episode of People, Place, and Purpose, the show where we hear stories from business owners, creators, and entrepreneurs about how they got started, what they love most, what challenges them, where they've had to pivot, learn, change, how relationships and networking have helped along the way, and ultimately, how they turn their passion into a successful venture and are living a life they love. I'm your host, Kate Lusko. I love to travel, eat delicious food, and meet and get to know cool people, and I'm so glad you're here today. Let's jump in. Henry Rosario and Rachel Willis are co-founders of Outpatch, where they're turning 100% recycled post-consumer plastic into stick-on patches, where the travel patches benefit nonprofits supporting the community each patch represents, and the humanitarian patches benefit nonprofits supporting communities in crisis, allowing you to give where it's needed most. Rachel is based in Colorado and is the head of growth and design. Henry is based in Vermont and is the head of operations and strategy. They met while serving in the U.S. Army, are both avid travelers, and created this business as a social entrepreneurship venture and a community of conscious travelers. Their story is fascinating, and I can't wait for you to hear it. With that, let's get to today's episode. Well, welcome, Henry and Rachel. I'm so glad to have you with us today. Thanks for being here.
Happy to be on. Nice to meet you, Kate.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So this is one of those cool stories. I actually didn't know either of you prior to a few weeks ago, but was connected through a childhood friend of mine who's a business associate of yours. And that's, those relationships and those small world stories are one of my favorite things. So it's going to be neat for me too, to get to know both of you through this process today. So I'd love for you to start, if you don't mind, with your background. So where you're from originally, what you did before doing what you do now. We're going to get into the actual business of things, but sort of what your background looks like and what led you to where you are today. Rachel, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Yeah. I'm Rachel, obviously. Where I grew up, a little bit of everywhere from Denver to Connecticut, back and forth, and went to West Point for college, graduated from West Point, and was an air defender headed to Korea. And that's where I met Henry. So we were both Army officers, platoon leaders in Korea. Did 6.5, 7 years in the Army, and then started working at PayPal. So did an awesome program called Breakline, which helps military veterans transition to tech. Was at PayPal for about 1.5 years. And I was like, you know what? I did not get out of the Army to just do the same thing without a uniform. And I quit. And I was like, I quit in October of 2019. And I said, 2020 is my year of travel. As it turns out, 2020 was not the most ideal year to say, I am traveling for screw society. But I still got through 3 months of great travel. Was with one of my very best friends in Patagonia, in New Zealand, and then Morocco. And we were in Morocco, in the desert in Morocco, when all the borders shut, scrambling back to the US of A. Bought a van, built it out, traveled around, and that's when Henry called and said, hey, let's do this thing. And that's where we are today. I'm now in Denver. Yeah, settled in Denver. My van is outside in the driveway.
Very cool. So awaiting more travel in the future.
Exactly.
Yeah, she still gets out there. Wanda still gets out there.
I love that she has a name.
Oh, obviously. If you have a van, you have to name her.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So before we get further into sort of what life has been like since the year of travel that sort of wasn't, Henry, how about you? What is your background?
Yeah, so I grew up in Portugal, actually, and then moved to the States and grew up the rest of my childhood around the Philly area, and went to school at the University of Richmond in Virginia, and commissioned into the Army through the ROTC program there. And as Rachel mentioned, our first duty station was Korea. So that's where I went after college and where I met Rachel. Did 2 years there, and then spent the rest of my time in the Army in Germany for 2 years. We just, I think, read this morning that the unit I was a part of is now deploying to Poland as part of all the shenanigans that are going on, unfortunately. But yeah, that's where I was. And then I actually met my now wife there in Germany. She was also in the Army. And I was getting out a little before her. So I wanted to stay in Europe, and I wanted to pursue international humanitarian aid after I got out of the Army. So I found a graduate program in Europe around that subject, did my master's over there. And then we moved together to Vermont, where she is from, and where we have since settled, which has actually been a pretty great place, all things considered, to ride out a pandemic. But yeah, rural living in complete isolation also had its challenges.
Sure.
But before the pandemic, I found a job at a business school, sort of doing international consulting stuff, and was working on a business on the side. And I'd always had this idea, like, okay, I learned all this stuff about international aid and how it could be improved. And I think one of the ways that I could contribute is by starting some sort of business. So started Outpatch as a side business, and then eventually went full time with it after a call to Rachel to ask her to hop on the train, and super glad she did. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Cool. And I know we talked a little bit offline about Portugal. I'm definitely going to circle back around with you on the side to get some insight there. Rachel, were you born outside the US too?
I was, yeah. I was born in the Philippines, and then my parents went to Spain, so was a small child in Barcelona before coming to Denver and then Connecticut. So I think that's one thing Henry and I also share, is just not really knowing where we're from. That question, where is such a hard question. Where do you want me to start? Name a year and I'll tell you where I'm from.
Yeah. You didn't know that was going to be a hard hitter.
Yeah. Started off with a real hard one.
Well, okay, so let me try for this one. This one might also be hard, but why patches? Like, where, of all the things you could have done, why patches?
Yeah. So lots of answers to that question, to that hard-hitting question. One simple one is, Rachel and I are both avid travelers. Obviously served most of my time abroad in the Army, and traveled internationally a lot. And my souvenir was always patches. So that's what I would collect from each country. And I always liked that they were, one, symbolic of that place, small, minimalist. It seemed to be the more sustainable option among the shelves of shot glasses and God forbid a magnet or whatever else. So that's kind of, where the idea started. But also in the Army, patches are also very symbolic, important thing. They designate the unit that you're a part of, exercises that you took part in. So they're, a great pathway for good memories. And it just seemed like an easy place to start. Here's this product, it's already out there. I think we can make it better. We can make it more sustainable. And we just took that first step, and I think it's worked out so far. I think Rachel has become a patchophile through this process. I'll let you speak to that.
I asked that same question when he called me, and I was like, dude, I don't care about patches, but I collect stickers.
Yes,
so our
stickers.
Patches are basically sticker patches. So it's the best of both worlds. And one of my mentors, when I was talking to her about this, she's like, just stay super focused on one product and make it the best one single product you can. And then you can do whatever you want, because you've got that I don't know. You're really good at that one thing. So people trust you.
And so it sounds like you may have just answered this question, but I'm curious, sort of, what was the premise? Like, when you started, I mean, to sort of commemorate places you've traveled, but what was the premise when you started, and did it evolve between then and now, sort of, that you've launched?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we are a bit unique, or thankfully, it is trending now, I think, the concept of social entrepreneurship. But the original genesis of why I wanted to start a business was to solve a social problem. And that was coming off of my studies of the international humanitarian aid sector and the nonprofit sector in general, and all the struggles with funding, not just getting enough funding, but the type of funding and how it's distributed, how it doesn't make it to locally led, on the ground organizations and individuals. And that is the core problem that I started to try and solve was how can we get these types of organizations more funding in an easier way. And I thought, business might be a great way to do that because it's faster, you can innovate, make it market-based so it's self-sufficient. And there's just, I'd always been aware that the tourism industry is heralded as a great way for a great path for economic development because it brings so much spending, jobs, and money into a country or a community. And so I thought, hey, this could be a great way, sort of a two birds, one stone situation where we could raise more funding for these nonprofits while making it easier for travelers to give back. And that's where, the market-based system would be built on is travelers wanting to give back to the places that they visit. And it did, has evolved since then. Speaking of great timing, I did start Outpatch like just before COVID, made the headlines as a side project. And I had this idea of it being, much more internationally focused or starting internationally focused.
Mm-hmm.
And that quickly changed to actually maybe domestic tourism is what we should do for the next few months, which became the next, 2 years.
Right. And so how did you decide, I read on the website all about the adhesive that you use and how it's a different process. And like, how did you figure out that was the best path? And how did you figure out who was going to make the patches? And what did that sort of R&D look like?
R&D, yeah. Thank you for giving me the credit of such a scientific term. But yeah, I basically wanted to solve my own problem. Like I said, I collected patches as my souvenir. I'd never seen a stick-on patch. They were always iron-on, sew-on. And I thought, patches have been around a long time. Have we not, as a society, found an easier way to adhere them onto things? And I did some research and actually went deep into what do you call them? Like listservs and blog discussions in the Boy Scout and Girl Scout communities. Because obviously they have patches too. And, you had, decades of all these parents complaining about how hard it is. And that's a whole separate story. But basically, someone did, invent this type of adhesive that could be used to permanently stick on those patches. And they could be machine washable and all that. And so I basically traced down the manufacturer of that adhesive. And then linked it with the manufacturer of our patches. And that is a story. So thank you, to the scouting community. I don't think I ever gave public credit to them.
Well, and it sounds like if they had turned out to be iron-on, Rachel and her love of stickers may not be here. So
it's true.
It was sort of a package deal. Right. So one of the other things I loved was to be candid, had never heard of a low profit LLC. I've heard of like a B Corp, right? Which seems similar, but how did you come to that determination? And can you talk a little bit about what that means for those listening who, like me, may not necessarily know what it entails?
Definitely. So as a general summary, a low profit LLC is for all real legal intents and purposes, just an LLC, but it was created as a legal structure by a series of states, Vermont being one of them, to try and incentivize what you could categorize as social entrepreneurship. Like, hey, we've got these businesses that don't just want to make profit their bottom line. Can we give them an actual legal designation that distinguishes them for a variety of reasons? And so I think maybe only 7 states recognize the designation. Vermont is one. I was in Vermont, and I love Vermont for many reasons. One of them is because there is such a culture, I think, of using community-centered business practices. You're starting a business not just to make a profit, but to give back to your community, to create something beautiful for your community. So yeah, it just fell into it, I guess, in my Google searching that, hey, like I'm trying to start a a business with a social mission. What is the legal structure I should use? And it just so happened that this structure existed in Vermont.
Very cool. And how about, I went to school for business, and I feel like every professor in business school warns you against partnerships, right? Like they're not a good idea, and you have to be so careful and write all of these warnings when you talk about the different types of businesses kind of come into that. I mean, you two have come together, right? You called upon Rachel and said, I have this idea. I'm curious kind of how that's worked and how you figured out who does what. And then for you to talk a little bit about what each of your roles look like.
Yeah, I think, before this podcast, Henry and I were talking about like, what do we want people to come away with? And one of them is, there is so much out there that says, don't start a business with a friend. But if you guys have an open and honest like communication and able to have really vulnerable conversations, hard conversations, then you should be, at least for us, we're good. But I think the difference is that we started our friendship as coworkers. So we were both platoon leaders. And honestly, when Henry and I first started working together, I could not stand the dude.
He knows this already. I
do. Yeah, this isn't.
and not to say, not to say that I couldn't see, like that's a bit harsh, but he came and followed me. So we were in the Army, and Henry just kept asking why this, why that, why are we doing it like this? And I was like, man, we are in the Army. You just like salute and drive on, dude. But later found that he is an intellect, I would call you, and thoughtful and an amazing friend. So I think because our friendship grew from professional ties and a deep place of respect and understanding, that it's been amazing to have this partnership. And also, like, we had really uncomfortable conversations when we started. We talked about exit. We talked about all the worst case scenarios, just as you're supposed to, but like pushed back on most things. And I think that's what led to what I think is an amazing founding team. Obviously, I think so. Yeah.
And so what do your roles look like? Like, Rachel, what are you responsible for?
Yeah, so I'm responsible for most things that the customer sees. So marketing, sales, design, website, and Henry's responsible for all the things that I don't want to do.
Well, that sounds like the perfect job.
I will say it did just so happen that while Rachel and I are very similar in a lot of ways, our personalities, our values, what we like to do in terms of work is pretty different. So that has worked out where Rachel is more, customer facing, let's say, and I like the back end stuff. So the ops, the Excel sheets, the finances.
Yeah.
I don't see a lot of smiling faces. Maybe Kate, you're not as excited about as I.
Well, but you get to delve into the world of adhesives and write all of those things that really are critical.
The R&D, yeah, exactly.
Well, and I love that you said that you talked about sort of the exit strategy. I taught just one semester, but I taught an intro to entrepreneurship class at the University of New Hampshire, and had the ultimate product of the semester was that each student wrote a business plan. And that was one of the pieces. And I think there was confusion from them about, like, why am I going to talk about closing a business I haven't even opened yet? But best practice is that you sort of have some things in place so that you have talked about it and you know what the other person expects and make sure you're on the same page. And so I think it's really great that you had that conversation among the others.
Yeah, pretty essential, I would say.
Definitely.
All right. So you have patches. You're in 12 different states. And what does that mean when you say you're in 12 states?
It means we have designs that represent those states.
And when people purchase a patch, part of it goes back to the community. Can you talk about, what that looks like? And I'm really curious the work that goes into how you choose nonprofits, right? Every time a world event happens, like what's happening right now, a gazillion things come up about donating, but how much do people really look into what their dollars are doing? And so I'm curious how you made those choices.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is, I guess, a distinguishing factor that we started with this social mission, right? So the nonprofit, the who are we going to donate to component actually came even before the business. So we knew strategically that we wanted to give our funding to locally led grassroots nonprofits, and we have sort of like hard metrics for what that means, but generally it just means people that are supporting the community that they are actually from. So like if you're visiting Vermont and you want to buy one of our patches, that part of the proceeds are going to go to a nonprofit led by someone from Vermont. And another sort of broader category is a nonprofit working at addressing an immediate need. So let's say like food insecurity, but also doing so in a way that addresses the system level issue. So it's not just giving people food in the immediate now, but hey, why is there food insecurity in this community? Is it maybe we need to produce more food locally, or we need to advocate for policies that allow for people to have access to healthier food, and things like that. So those are the general criteria that we look at. And yeah, I mean, it takes us a lot of time and that process has sort of evolved, but we found some great resources for sort of filtering organizations that we would want to work with when we go into a new state. And luckily, the nonprofits we already work with have also been great resources for finding other organizations. Same with the artists that we work with. I don't know if we've mentioned, but we try and get artists from Vermont to design the Vermont patches, right, and so on. And they also will generally be involved in some kind of nonprofit or know someone who knows someone. So yeah, part organic and definitely part really strategic system level approach to identifying where we can get the biggest bang for our buck, I guess.
And how have you made those inroads into the states, maybe where maybe Vermont and Colorado were sort of easier, if you will, but how have you, gotten into knowing artists and nonprofits and such in the other states?
Yeah, on the nonprofit side, I'll let Rachel speak to the artist side because that's what she deals with. But like I said, we get a lot of referrals from the nonprofits that we already work with in other states, but we also cold called community foundations in those states or other organizations that were maybe too big for us to fall into to meet our criteria, but maybe they have smaller partners that they work with. So yeah, I mean, people are definitely, we were essentially calling saying like, hey, we're trying to give you free money, but we're not, I'm not a Nigerian prince, and it's also, COVID. So things are just a little wacky and, explaining the whole tourism component and trying to make it easier for tourists to get back. You'd think face value, it's an easy sell, but also sounds too good to be true. So definitely a lot of funny conversations, but generally, people have been super appreciative about the concept and the idea.
Yeah, and then with the artists, Instagram, baby. I mean, that and word of mouth. So a lot of artists have seen other artists post about their work with us, with Outpatch, and have reached out directly, mostly also via Instagram.
Well, and I wondered if it was sort of networking, right? I mean, so often it's like this small world story, right? I didn't know either of you, and sort of through people, right? All those degrees of connection. And it seems like that could be a way, in theory, to make some of those inroads.
Totally. Actually, so one of our artists, Nori, we met through, there's this Facebook group called Basecamp Outdoors for people posting jobs in the outdoor space. And I forget, someone's like, post about what your biggest need is right now. And I was like, artists, I need artists. And Nori reached out to me. And it turns out that that partnership between us and Nori, she's done Oregon patches, she's done Earth Day patches, that crew neck that Henry's wearing. She designed the merch for that and has been an awesome business guide for us, like figuring out that artist partnership, like what makes sense, what is fair to pay an artist. How do we make sure that we highlight the artists? Because as Henry's working with making sure there's equity in this nonprofit space and making sure that we are funding grassroots organizations, I also want to make sure that we are highlighting the artists, because when you walk into a souvenir shop, you just see a bunch of the same thing over and over again. But where we want to differentiate ourselves is that we are actually bringing people from that community, designing patches, designing art, in my opinion, that is symbolic of that place that you just visited and had an awesome time at.
Well, and that's one of my favorite things, having just gotten back from traveling. I always look for, like, what is somewhere known for, not just, what's in the shop that was made elsewhere and they put their name on, right? Like, I want to see the handmade things that people who live there are actually creating. So that's such a cool way to do that. And to your point about, making sure you do it in kind of the best way possible, I would imagine there's a bit of, kind of that expression, drinking from a fire hose, right? That even though maybe at the top level, it seemed like, yep, we're just going to do this thing, but you're creating everything from scratch, even if you're kind of pulling from other people who've done it before. If you want to build it differently, there's a lot of organic, I would imagine.
Absolutely.
So you have other people on your team. Can you talk a little bit
Yes.
about kind of how you hired and what the structure of the organization looks like?
Yeah. So last summer, we were like 6 months old, again, drinking from the fire hose and realizing we need some help. So I posted on LinkedIn and a couple other places looking for interns. And we had nearly 200 applicants. It was like 100.
Wow.
Yeah, it was wild. I was like, whoa. And from that, we were able to have 5 interns come help us last summer, and they were all amazing. Most of them went back to school, but one, Caroline, stayed on with us and is now just the do everything gal. We just hired a creative director, and when you think of patch companies, obviously in 2022, that's what year we're in. Every company is also a media company. So trying to be, cooler than the other souvenir companies, which isn't hard to do. So yeah. And then our artists are part of our team. We also think our nonprofits are part of our team. I think in order to really build a successful thing, you need to give people credit and you need to bring people along in this journey. And it's not just the team that we have listed on our website, but it's friends, it's family that have all lended a hand. And man, it has taken a village so far to get to where we're at, and couldn't do it without every single person.
So lifestyle wise, I mean, both of you went from something with super structure, you said earlier, like, you just do what you're told and the rules have been around for who knows how long, to now you're on this journey of, probably very few boundaries, and especially working remotely, right? There's always blurred boundaries when you work from home. How has the adjustment been, and how's the work-life balance for each of you?
Yeah, well, actually, for me, it's a little different. I think that you can say for Henry, but I was coming from a year of travel, living in a van, really not having any structure for the first time in my life. So because I went to the military academy from the time I was 18, was living a very structured life until I was 31. And it actually took some adjustment for me to get back into that world.
Yeah.
Which I think is the opposite for Henry. And that's one of our crucial conversations that we had and are having as well, is how do we have this job, this company, and make it seamlessly integrate within our life. So we are building not just the company that we want, but the life that we want. Being able to, yesterday on a Tuesday, I went and skied in the morning and then worked in the afternoon. And that's the life that I want to lead. And that's what we're trying to build every day. So really being intentional with my time. Yeah.
Well, and I would imagine there's sort of building it for yourself, but then also building it into the culture of the company, right? That those,
Totally.
Even though they're sort of the same, they're also a little bit different to make sure that you kind of practice what you preach.
Absolutely. I mean, as a travel company, I think we should also be traveling and exploring and getting out there. So that's my goal with this organization, this company, and this. What I think when I think of Outpatch, I don't just think of it as a patch company. Like the patch is the ticket to the community and this community of conscious travelers that are wanting to make a difference in this world. And in order to lead this community, we have to be actually people that are doing that thing.
Yeah, I love that. So Henry, how about you? How has this transition been from kind of more structure to a different structure, perhaps?
Yeah, I did have some sort of soft landing after the Army. I went into graduate school, and you're definitely, working hard, but you have a lot more flexibility than you do in the Army, which was, I think, a necessary thing. But it was sort of a funny, I say funny now, coincidence that as I was starting Outpatch, my partner wife was starting law school. And so, two very labor intensive pursuits. And yeah, I think she actually took the bar maybe the day before or the day after that we officially launched Outpatch. So leading up to that, like we were, our house was just was a very work focused environment, I will say. And she is much more structured than me. And so, and it was, the height of the pandemic. So we were in our rural town. I don't want to say like there wasn't much to do besides work, but I guess it was a conducive situation and context to having the discipline to sort of sit down and work on something, even though you have the flexibility to do anything, right, when you're starting a business. And so that helped a lot. And I think, the pandemic has affected a lot of things. Obviously, Rachel's in Colorado, I'm in Vermont, so we were a remote company inherently. But now that it just seems so much more acceptable to, be working while traveling or work from different places, I guess it's meshed well with what we're trying to accomplish, everything that Rachel talked about. So it's been a great thing. I look forward to doing more of it.
And also want to give a shout out to the partners that that help us along this journey. They are also part of the team, integral.
Yeah. Truly.
Honorary mention kind of a thing. Yeah. So what are your hopes for this? If, thinking about this, like this is your baby, what do you want to see it become? I'm sure expanding the states, and you talked a little bit about, sort of traveling while you're doing this work, but do you have other things that you've discussed that are on your goals?
Yeah, very basic level. Our vision is for travelers to be able to give where they go, wherever they go. So that means every US state, every international destination, there is some easy way for someone to give back to the community that just hosted them. And I think that's a very clear growth trajectory for us. I really believe we're going to do it through patches or otherwise, like I said, or like Rachel said, that's really just the ticket to the community of conscious travelers that are trying to do that. But I think what is really cool about our product, again, going back to our social mission, is that is why we exist. The social mission of supporting nonprofits. And that doesn't just mean financially, that means being evangelists for their work, connecting the amazing work that they're doing wherever it is, whether it's Vermont. We also support humanitarian nonprofits in places like DR Congo, and that's a place that not a lot of Americans, pay attention to or aren't educated about what's going on there. And we can be that medium to explain, like, hey, there are these incredible people, truly change makers that are making our world better. And you can support them, you can learn about them. And I really feel like that is something that I want to put out into the world, and to continue to grow, and like influencing consumers, customers, whatever you want to call them, to grow their awareness of the world, how they can make a difference, and how inspiring, it is, to be part of this community.
Yeah, it's almost product agnostic, and that's that media company I just touched on earlier. That's what we want to do more of, and we have partnered with such amazing nonprofits, and really in the future we want to do a better job at highlighting their work, both artists and nonprofits.
When I love and identify with the word evangelist, it's one of my favorites. And I feel like that's what this podcast is for me, right? Like, it's very selfishly, I love this. Like, I could just hear people's stories and sort of, right, that gives me energy. But when I think about how many people have listened to me, it's how many people have been introduced to these amazing people and these incredible businesses and organizations that may not have otherwise known about them. And so it's kind of neat when you have sort of that underlying mission that, to your point, it doesn't necessarily matter what it is that you're producing as much as, that you're sort of driving this mission. Pretty cool. So tough question. Do you have a favorite patch?
Ooh, tough
question. Contentious question. Even like, I do tentatively. So we also do custom patches, right? So we started doing that. And at first it was sort of a struggle, like, hey, how is that going to fit into our social mission model? And how do we handle that? But we just decided, one, we could do patches for nonprofits, so still supporting their social mission, and also for companies, for individuals, for profits, and have part of the proceeds still go to our humanitarian nonprofits specifically. So we just got, I just happen to have it here too. We Perfect. Just got, because it's my favorite patch. I keep it, near and close to my heart. But this patch was a custom patch for Wild Kind Academy. Never met them. They apparently saw some of our patches in Washington and thought, oh, that's super cool. Like, we should get patches made for us. And it's just a beautiful design. And to me, I guess, maybe being the more patch obsessed person, like, I really love that you could have something that totally symbolizes not just your name, your community, what you've created, but do it in a way that is like through an image, through art. It's not just words, it's the combination of an image and words that speaks to your core values, who you are, what you're trying to put out into the world. So for now, I will say that is my favorite patch.
Yeah. And talk about that organic growth. Like, the store that they found our patch in, Ember Goods in in Olympia, Washington.
Yeah.
We stumbled in there while we were launching all our P&W patches, had a whole morning in there. People were buying patches while we were working because they just saw the beautiful ones that were sitting on the table. Had amazing conversations with those folks, and to know that someone went in there, bought a patch from there, then looked us up, scanned our QR code, looked us up, said, oh, wow, this is a really rad company, and then ordered patches. Like, that's how our omni-channel marketplace is pumping. And for my favorite, I think it might also be a custom patch. The Rad Power. We also did a patch for Rad Power bikes.
True.
And that was designed by Nori as well, so who did the Oregon patches. Also a cool story. She did our Earth Day patches. Someone within Rad Power Bikes follows Nori or saw that patch that she did, reached out to her and was like, we want one of these patches. She forwarded their information to us, and we did like nearly 1,000 patches for them. In the design, it says, where will you go? And it's beautifully done. And again, just that organic growth, like this podcast, has been a beacon of our growth, is people getting it and wanting to support it. And
I think that's, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and like, that is the validation that helps every day when people come and like, you guys are doing this thing that needs to be done. and it's easy to sit down at this desk and do Excel files.
Well, I will say, I think it's worth, that so many funny business stories that I've sort of forgotten over the course of the year. I mean, number one, Rachel mentioned, like, we were going through the PNW when we were launching our Washington, Oregon patches. That's been something super cool. Like, I've flown out there. We've done road trips in Wanda, the van, to like meet retailers, meet artists on the ground. Amazing. But the Rad Power Bike story is really funny because I remember it was super early on. We had just launched kind of, and Nori, our artist, had said, oh, I think there's this like bike shop that wants to do some patches. And I was thinking like, some cool, very hip like bike shop in Seattle or whatever. And we're doing the design and whatever else. And it's like, oh, Rad Power Bikes. They're actually this like huge international company that was exploding during the pandemic because everyone wanted an electric bike. And I realized like, my neighbors own Rad Power Bikes. I was seeing them all over, different cities we were visiting. And it just so happened that my brother lives in Seattle. I was going to visit anyways. So I actually personally delivered their custom patches. And it was just such a fun moment, met their head of HR, and they wanted me to ride the bikes, and it was just a blast. And I think, running a business is such an adventure, but it's an adventure happening at such a high tempo that you sort of don't even have time to appreciate or remember like what is happening on that journey. So that's great that just remembered that.
Yeah. I mean, and I think for us, we are yes people. So like, if there's an opportunity to do something rad, we'll say yes to it. So I think that's been one of the keys for us, is just sending it.
Yeah.
Well, and it sounds a little silly to say, but so much of me feels like when good people refer you to other people, they're probably good people too, right? Like, that's part of what makes it so fun, is that there's this sort of built-in assumption that you're going to enjoy that interaction too.
Definitely.
Which, so that's the way to do it. That's the way to grow things. So what have you learned? What is your advice? What would you, for someone embarking on any sort of journey or considering it, what are the words of wisdom that you would pass along?
Yeah, I think it's just do it. Like, whether it's, thanks Nike. You probably didn't know that this was just going to be a Nike and Rad Power Bikes. But seriously, I think whether it's, for me, everything I've done in my life, I've just gone for it, taken risk. And I understand that that's because I have an amazing family that I know can lean. Like, there is a certain amount of privilege to this statement, but taking risk is, I think, imperative to living the life that you want. So whether it was going into the Army, going to West Point, that was the only college that I applied to, like a weirdo. Getting out of the Army was also a risk, and working for PayPal, and then quitting a really good job to travel, just because that's the urge that I felt in that moment. And now just taking those first steps to start this company and being present in it. I think at the end of the day, if you have a desire and it is a burning desire for you, the hardest step is that first step. But once you do it, it is so rewarding. And that is what I try to practice, what my partner Macy and I try to do every single day, is just, if we want to do it within reason, like but professionally and also personally. I mean, there's probably a certain tempo that I could probably scale back a little bit, but yeah, I'd say just take that first step, take that risk, and if it doesn't work out, fail forward.
I love that.
Yeah, I totally agree with all of that. I think Rachel and I are very similar in that regard. I also only applied to one school. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I think we have an idea, like a sort of ambiguous idea of what we want to do, and we follow it, and we don't really know how it's going to work out, but we keep pulling the thread. It's my only patch pun. I should have put in more patch puns, but
we also didn't even talk about our thread, which is like a massive component of this.
True. true. Our thread is made out of recycled water bottles. That was like a huge component of our sustainability push, and actually something that Rachel has been getting on me to do since the beginning. You know, it's like, oh man, we're already doing so much good, aren't we? We have to make a more sustainable patch. But yes, we absolutely do. So we are doing that now. But yeah, you know, I knew some nebulous part of me wanted to start a business, and so you take one little step, and it just, you know, keeps cascading until there's no turning back in a way. But I will balance that out with like, I think Rachel and I are both very independent people, and one thing that I've learned from starting a business that's been rather unique compared to my other life experiences is that you need help. Like, you need to ask for help. You need to accept help from the people that love you, from complete strangers, because, well, not only is it so difficult, you know, there's so much rejection involved, so much risk, ambiguity, that it's just harder in that regard. But also that is, at least for us, what building a business is. You know, it's building a community, and you need to let people into that community and be vulnerable. And that's been a huge, like I said, lesson learned for me. Come a long way in that regard.
So great. So great. So my final question, and then I'll give you an opportunity if there are things I haven't asked you about to share, but it's sort of somewhat unrelated, but travel. So your favorite place you've been, the place that's the top of your list. And people on the podcast won't, but I see your face. Like, I have such a hard time with favorites because I like so many of everything, right? It doesn't matter what the question is, but so it doesn't have to be, you know, there's no tests, but some of your favorite places.
I don't know if it's a favorite place, but it's moments with people.
Okay.
I think that being in Patagonia with my best friend and my partner looking at Fitzroy, like, that was an amazing moment. And I think travel is a collection of moments that you've had with strangers or people that you love dearly. And that's my favorite thing is really being present in that moment with humans, with like people, place put together. And that is what I take with me, and why I'm addicted to continuing that life, that journey of adventure.
Do you have somewhere that's sort of top of your list to go next?
Ooh. I think I've explored a lot of Asia. I want to do more South America. I want to do more Europe if we don't get into World War III.
And Henry, how about you?
Yeah, I'll definitely echo what Rachel said. I think the more you travel, it becomes more and more about who you're traveling with, and you know, the experience being something that bonds you to another human being, both the one that you're traveling with, the ones you're traveling with, but also the people that you're meeting along the way. But I do have a pretty distinct, I guess, most impactful trip, or at least up there. I was studying in Hong Kong for a semester and went to Nepal for a couple weeks, and was riding around Nepal on a motorcycle. I mean, it's an amazing country. Just the eco-diversity, the people. It was a pretty incredible trip in that regard. But number one, that's where I was exposed or fully realized like how amazingly diverse our world is. As I visited the town of Lumbini, which is where many people believe the Buddha was born, and you know, it's like, to us in the West, you know, Jerusalem, but times 100. You know, it just, the scale of everything in Asia tends to be so much bigger, and it was this amazing place of pilgrimage that I don't think many people have heard about, but it was just so rich, so vast, so beautiful, so incredible. And you know, I really appreciated just how amazing diversity on our planet is in terms of humans and you know, other beings, but in that case, humans. And also during that trip, you know, Nepal is an amazing country, but also, you know, has struggled economically and it was post, the massive earthquake that really devastated Kathmandu. So I saw a lot of people struggling, truly horrendous poverty. And one of the things that struck me was the tourism industry was sort of still booming, and you had this contrast of mostly wealthy people visiting this country and sort of just having a good time right next to people, and many cases children experiencing extreme poverty. And I have this clear image of seeing these kids on the street, and I just think that needed to be fixed. Basically, like, it can't be like this. We need to have a way that balances this out, that improves the economic well-being of all people, not just people from a certain place. So that country is always going to be special to me. And as far as going where we want to go next, I guess Rachel and I are going to Thailand together. So speaking of, going somewhere with someone you care about and experiencing something, I'm definitely looking forward to that. It's my first international trip since 2019. So really looking forward to that.
Very cool. Yeah. And that's the thing about travel, right? It changes who we are, right? And it's I think in ways that we may not even recognize at the time necessarily, by exposing us to different people and experiences. It's just very magical.
We need to get back to it.
Yeah, right. Anything I didn't ask you about, or if you want to share where people can find you on social media and online, and maybe in stores, how they can find your patches?
I think we covered a lot. As far as where you can find us on Instagram at Outpatch, LinkedIn, Facebook, TikTok.
Oh, I have not checked you out on TikTok.
We're just, like I said, we just hired our creative director. So yeah. Jenna, if you're listening, get on it. Our website is outpatch.org. Shoot us an email. If you'd like to connect further. We love talking to people that share similar values, and people that don't, like, push back on what we're doing. That's also great.
Well, making those connections, right, to expand throughout the rest of the world. So
check out our patches, check out our impact, check out our sustainability efforts, and let us know how we can do better or how great we're doing.
And custom patches, right? We talked about that too. So that's an opportunity as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, this has been so fun. I really enjoyed the opportunity to talk with both of you, and look forward to, as we said, evangelizing your organization and your message and all of that. And certainly I'll be watching for some Thailand TikTok videos. I think that's in your future.
Yeah. Can't wait.
Thank you both. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks so much, Kate.
Such a fun conversation. I'm so glad to be able to share that with you. On to the takeaways from today's episode. To get to the really good stuff, you have to be willing to have the difficult conversations, put yourself in a position of vulnerability, and ask the tough questions. If you love what you do and are committed to the mission, it really makes everything, yes, even the spreadsheets or your equivalent of a less desirable task, that much easier. Practice what you preach. Build an organization or a business that reflects the kind of life you want to live. You have to be willing to ask for and accept help, whether that's from the people who love you or even strangers. Lead by example. And taking risk is imperative to living the life you want to live. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of People, Place, and Purpose. Please remember to subscribe, rate, review, and leave a comment. As a new podcast, your support really means a lot. And if you know someone who might be inspired by this story, please share it with them. I would also love to engage with you directly, so please find us on Instagram at People, Place, Purpose. I'm so excited for us to continue to learn and grow and discover new things together, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Until then, it's a beautiful day for an adventure. Get out there and explore.